so we can make the most of this webinar. I would appreciate if we can all keep our mics mute while the presentations are going on to avoid distracting the speakers. And because of time, we would not be allowing people to unmute themselves to ask questions. So please write down your questions or drop them in the chat. The speakers will attend to all the questions during the question and answer session. We will also take a group picture at exactly 10:30, and I would kindly ask for you to put on your camera at that time. So if you need to, dress up and, prepare yourself or get yourself ready for the picture so we can see your beautiful faces. So yes, let's jump right in. This is the second part of our energy justice webinar. And if you joined us last week, you would agree with me that our speakers did a great job laying some of the foundation about energy transition in Africa and the Africa energy mix and the situation we are currently in Africa. And so today we're going to be talking about energy poverty in Africa. I don't know if I'm audible and if everyone can hear me. So basically, Africa is going into COP28, and energy transition is important to us as a continent because a lot of people on the continent still lack energy access. And all of our leaders are definitely looking for pathways and ways through which they can, pull their people out of energy poverty. And as journalists, it's important that we are able to, understand the issues, understand the African situation so that we can be able to report effectively. So today, joining us to have this conversation is Victor Otino, who is the Research Associate Energy Access at World Resources Institute. We also have Elizabeth Chege, who is an energy efficiency and cooling specialist at Sustainable Energy for All. And we have Abdul Karim Mujid, who is a Premium Times journalist and has extensively reported environmental and climate change issues. So our first presentation will be from Victor Otino. Victor is the Research Associate Energy Access at World Resources Institute, undertaking research under the Energy for Development and leading the implementation of the subnational energy planning work. Prior to joining World Resources Institute, Victor was a researcher at Strathmore Energy Research Center, where he led projects on subnational energy planning, productive use of energy, and the land use, bioenergy, and waste reduction in Kenya. Please, Victor, the floor is yours, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you so much, Vivian, for that really momentous introduction. Got to check whether I'm audible, and
yes,
also to bring my presentation on board. Please just confirm if you can be able to see.
Okay.
Okay. Is
yes.
it visible?
Yes, it is.
Great, thank you. So, as already said, my name is Victor Tieno, and I work with World Resources Institute Africa. That's WRI Africa. And WRI is, I'll tell you a bit about it, is a global research-based organization. It's an NGO, which works in the nexus of people, environment, and development, just to ensure that the transition that we are talking about today, work for people, work for environment, work for climate. And one of the key things that we focus on are the human systems. We focus on food, we focus on land, water, energy, and cities. So our work is around that. So the conversation that we are having today sits very well in what we are doing in Africa and also globally. So just to put a context of what we are talking about, Vivian has already mentioned the first webinar that happened. I did not participate. I hope that if this is a repetition, I'll be forgiven for that. But I just wanted to mention that energy transition refers to a shift in the sources of energy that satisfy the energy demand. And of course, the demand can be of various kinds. And the transition that we are talking about currently is not the first one, it's the fourth transition. And the first was transition from traditional biomass into coal. Second included the oil products, and the third also involved the inclusion of natural gas in the energy mix. But the current one is more focused on the sustainability. That's the major driver. The previous ones, the driver was economic prosperity. So that's why we see that the countries that are members of the OECD, their energy consumption per capita is very high compared to the countries which are not. And this is where Africa sits. Perhaps we may be asking ourselves, Africa, does it make sense to talk about transition, or we talk about progression? Whichever way we look at it, I think it still fits in the context of transition, because we are just seeing that the first transition was moving from traditional biofuels or biomass into coal. And in Africa, as we are able to see the graphs that we have here, in Africa, currently in 2020, traditional biomass still sits heavily with us, especially in rural areas, and we need to transit from that as well into the modern energy that that are being promoted. So if we are to meet our economic prosperity, just like the other countries, then transition makes sense. If we are to decarbonize, transition really makes a lot of sense. So to me, because I see this as a conversation, the just transition that we are talking about, leaving no one behind, would include economic prosperity and also decarbonization. So fast forward, the transition we are talking about should be inclusive, should be sustainable, affordable, and secure, but at the same time creates value for business and society. Just an emphasis on what has been mentioned. But there is a balance that we have to ensure as we seek for economic development and growth, as we seek to handle energy security and access, then environmental sustainability is also very key as we do that. Even though Africa contributes very little, we suffer from the impacts of it. So it is a global problem which for us to address, then all of us need to be involved. So leaving no one behind, I see it in a number of ways. This list is not exhaustive. It is about addressing accessibility, affordability, capacity. It's about being inclusive, about unlocking finance, about jobs, addressing climate impacts, and focusing where energy is needed the most. And of course, looking at the interlinkages. So I want to go just a bit quickly on a few of this so that I'll also be able to give room for interactions. So when we talk of jobs, the energy transition can only be just when jobs are addressed. Of course, as a result of the energy transition, there will be a lot of jobs that will be created. IRENA estimates 4 million by 2030, 8 million jobs or green jobs by 2050 in Africa. But at the same time, there will be job losses or misalignments. For example, countries that are dependent on fossil fuel, some people may lose their jobs, but that shouldn't be for it to be just. That means there should be reskilling, there should be skilling, even to the lowest levels. For it to be inclusive, that youth in the village, that woman in the village should be able to have skills to move from depending on the biomass-based energy solutions into the modern energy solution. So when we address also the job market, when we address also the skills, then that contributes to an aspect of not leaving anyone behind. The situation in Africa, if you look at this map, the topmost countries that are energy deficient are found in Africa. And according to the recent SDG tracking report, by 2030, if we continue the way we are, 560 million people will still lack electricity access. At the moment, we are at 567 million without access to electricity. So a lot of effort need to be put in place. We cannot talk about just transition if all of these people have not been, do not have access to electricity, because this is an input to economic prosperity. That's electricity. The situation is even worse when we come to clean cooking access. 0.9 million in Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa currently, and if the situation continues as it is, the number is going even to increase to 1.1 by 2030. So we need to act. We cannot talk about just transition if this population is still depending on solid fuels, which are not sustainable, which are hazardous to health. Another issue, apart from access, is affordability. I think to ensure that no one is left behind, then we need to look at the affordability aspect. And the causes of affordability are varied. Just to mention two of them, in affordability here refers to affordability of energy services. One is poverty. 40% of people in sub-Saharan Africa live below the poverty line. 40%. And energy prices are also high. So this graph just shows, if you compare the energy costs in Africa with the OECD countries, you see that most of the countries fall, or their energy prices, the tariffs are higher than the OECD countries. And these are countries which are already on the top income levels. Yet their energy prices are lower than those that are still on the bottom side of things. So that makes energy not to be accessible. And if it is not accessible in terms of affordability side of things, then how can we say we are not leaving anyone behind? So we need to urgently address the affordability aspect of things. Apart from that, we address the capacity. What amount of electricity do you have, or do I have? And is that amount able to stimulate productive uses? Can I use it to mail? Can I use it to irrigate? Can I use it for business? Can I use it to generate income? In other words, it is recommended from research that the minimum amount that generates, that stimulates productive use is 1,000 kilowatt hour per year. That can enable one to generate around $6.85 per day. Currently, we are at this level, mostly in Africa, and the way we define energy access needs to be adjusted so that we aim to provide access which enables people to be able to generate income. When we do that, then we'll be able not to leave people behind. So that should be a focus, and is something that the African leadership, I think, are keen on. Beyond that, there is availability, there's reliability, there's quality. Now, on the interlinkages with other SDGs, this is something which is a common understanding that energy feeds into all the SDGs, and therefore when we are planning for energy, we need really to be integrative or integrated as much as possible in order not to leave any behind. So one of the important tools which WRI and partners are working on is called Energy Access Explorer. It's an open online interactive customized tool that help to address the energy access challenge. And it also helps to prioritize where investments need to go the most as far as energy access, both electricity and clean cooking is concerned. There is a tool called Onset, which helps to model electricity access through grid, through mini grids, and also through solar home systems. As you are maybe able to see, the blue is grid and the yellowish, there is mini grids, and it's also solar home system depending on the color legend. So there are people that can best be served by grid. There are people that can be best served with solar home systems and mini grid. So when that modeling is done, it's able to help see where are these people living, so that they can be served. There is also another tool called OnStove. I think I have missed something here. OnStove, which does the same on the clean cooking side of things. So when these modelings are done together and integrated into the Energy Access Explorer, then one is able to identify where are the priority areas for intervention in terms of electricity access, in terms of clean cooking access, and do even further analysis. What are the support mechanisms that may be needed? How much investment would be needed? Which type of technology should be employed? Which type of clean cooking technologies and fuels should be promoted in specific areas? Because that is different. And this tool has been adopted in a number of geographies in Africa and even in India, and a lot of partners are working on the same. So if we're interested in knowing more, you can be able to just Google Energy Access Explorer .org. So who is responsible for not leaving anyone behind? All of us, every individual, you and I, and including that person that we do not want to leave behind. So everyone is to be involved, from the top leadership levels, from the international level, even to the local levels. We can only be able to achieve this if we do it from a multi-stakeholder approach. I would like to stop there and we'll be able to take comments as we continue to converse together. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Victor. That was such a good presentation. And, from what you said, energy transition can only be just if, jobs are addressed. And Africa needs to address a lot of things in terms of energy transition for us to have a just transition. For us to meet our energy prosperity, everybody needs to be involved to be able to help the continent transition. So thank you so much. I would ask us now to put on our cameras so that we can take a group picture before we go ahead to the next presentation. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. All right. Suzanne?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just letting people put on their video.
Okay.
All right, so I'll take it in on the count of 2. 1, 2. All right, lovely. I got it.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everybody. All right. Yeah. So thank you again, Victor. We're going to move on to the next presentation. After all the presentations, then we can take the questions. So our next presentation is from Elizabeth Chege. Elizabeth is an energy efficiency and cooling specialist at Sustainable Energy for All and the co-founder of Web Limited for the Planet and Kenya Green Building Society. Elizabeth is a World Green Building Council board member and immediate past chair of the Africa Regional Network, the first Kenyan African and woman to hold both positions. She has won various global recognition awards, including the inaugural National Diversity and Inclusion Environmental Conservation Champion Awards, the prestigious World Green Building Council Chairs Award, and Women in Real Estate Legends and Leaders Awards. She lives by a particular quote. She says she has made it her core business to be part of the solution and lives by the motto, what we build today will form the Africa of tomorrow. And I totally agree with that. All right, thank you so much, Elizabeth. Please do us the honors.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you so much, Victor Otieno, for your presentation previously, because it covers a lot of elements that I will not go through once again. I think we'll move the conversation more towards this COP28 and the energy poverty in Africa conversation. So just trying to get my screen to, there we are. So a bit of an introduction about Sustainable Energy for All. Commonly, you'll hear us being referred to as SE for All. We're an international organization working in partnership with the UN and leaders in government, private sector, philanthropy, civil society to drive further, faster action toward achievement of SDG 7. So as mentioned previously, SDG 7 drives the other SDGs. So SDG 7 itself is referred to as access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all by 2030. And I think Victor mentioned quite well that we need not leave anyone behind. And this is in alignment with the Paris Agreement on climate change, reducing greenhouse gas emissions to limit climate effects. And it's actually to limit climate warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So in this decade of action, we're already, I think we have 6 years left now towards 2030. So it means we have urgent action that we really have to cover. SE for All works around data-driven decision-making, partnerships with high-impact countries, and implementation on the ground so that we can actually feel the work we're doing around SDG 7 and have direct impact on the people. If I move on to the next slide here, I want to also mention that our CEO herself, Damilola Ngunbi, you might have seen her in a lot of this tables discussing energy access, renewable energy and energy efficiency and opportunities around it. She has a dual appointment as UN Secretary General, Special Representative for SE for All and co-chair of UN Energy, along with Akim Steiner, the UNDP administrator. I'll move on. There's a lot of detail there. Just to say our headquarters are in Vienna. We have offices in New York City and Abuja, Nigeria as well. And we've kicked off offices in Nairobi. So I'm very excited about that. And we're also in Washington, DC. So we support various countries. A lot of them are emerging countries, developing countries. As an organization, we provide the tools and resources necessary to finance and scale solutions with enough electricity to power lives beyond livelihoods. And you'll hear me talking more about life and livelihoods in this presentation. We aim to help countries power their dreams into reality with a focus on energy for inclusive prosperity. So this is now getting into the actionable areas of this conversation that we've talked about for energy poverty. This just lists a few of the elements that we've done. Our work is grounded in the delivery of measurable results supported by our partners and donors. And here, if I point out one, for example, 25,000 health facilities targeted to be electrified by 2025 as part of the Multilateral Health Facility Electrification Energy Compact, for which SE4All and Power Africa secured commitments from more than 15 UN agencies, donors, and other partners. And one of the things you need to look out for, because I know that's part of the requirement of this discussion today, is how we're approaching health, especially coming up to COP28. We'll be discussing more on health as a necessity. So a few more details here. This goes into a little bit more detail on SDG 7. We talk a lot about energy access. That is SDG 7.1, for which we are not on track towards reaching our SDG 2030 goals. SDG 7.2 is renewable energy, not on track either. And SDG 7.3 is energy efficiency, which we're not on track either. At the bottom here, you'll see we have the opportunity around the SDGs. So for example, for 7.1, for every dollar invested in a renewable energy transition, GDP is expected to grow by an additional 93 cents above business as usual. For the renewables themselves, which is something that's quite common, discussed quite a lot, written a lot by journalists, the opportunity is that investments in clean energy produce 3.5 times more jobs than the same investments in fossil fuels. So you start considering Africa with 70% of the population being youth and the opportunities around jobs in that. So for 7.3 itself, the opportunity here is for every $1 million US invested in energy efficiency, building retrofits generates 17 jobs. So what we're asking people is that energy efficiency is a low-hanging fruit as well, and we should consider that. Around the Paris climate goals, the opportunity is prioritizing access to clean energy sources in countries with significant access gaps, helps avoid long-term growth in emissions and lock-in of new fossil fuel power sources. And as mentioned before, a lot of those countries are actually in Africa. So as one SE4All, we address the challenges of climate change and development while harnessing the opportunities in the global south. We aim to support countries and people by powering their dreams into reality, as I mentioned before. So that's the tracking between now to COP28, SDG goals 2030 to net zero by 2050. And what we do is bring all this together. How do we do that? Through various programs. So for example, you might have heard of the Africa Carbon Market Initiative that links into the conversation on finance and sources of finance as well. I talked about data, creating an enabling environment where we look at policies and work with governments on policies enhancement, global advocacy, so driving this conversation forward like today. Not leaving anyone behind includes gender and youth, and really focusing on how that can be accelerated. We also have energy transition investment planning, allowing countries and working with countries to actually plan on taking stock of where they are, looking at over above business as usual, how they can improve and what is needed and how much is actually needed to meet the SDG goals, as well as the net zero by 2050. Sorry for the background noise. So we've set up energy transition offices. We have universal energy for all programs, and that's a facility that's still ongoing in Nigeria and the rest of West Africa. REMI itself is Renewable Energy Manufacturing Initiative, because we saw the opportunity that if we're going to have all these jobs being created, we need to move away from just being a consumer society in Africa and being able to actually build the renewable energy itself. And for that, I'd like to really focus on an aspect that has been a blind spot, and that's the reference of this presentation. So the blind spot as well is that in a warming world, we really haven't put in enough effort in cooling. So coming up to COP28, we'll really focus on cooling. And this is our report that we launched last week at the G20 Summit. It's called Chilling Prospects Report. And it's also on our website at Sustainable Energy for All and the various partners that we worked with. With this, you'll start seeing a lot of the opportunities and also the challenges that we've seen for cooling. So for example, cooling itself, United Nations declares first week of July world's hottest ever recorded. And you'll see this happens quite a lot in the last few years. We always have the hottest day or in the season being recorded year on year. The heat waves themselves are producing sustained dangerous high temperatures, threatening people and products globally. So when you talk about energy poverty and energy justice, you start seeing the link where people actually are suffering on the basis that if they don't have access to energy or access to cooling, they're being impacted higher by a warming world. So you've seen news like this, unprecedented heat waves in Morocco and Algeria, especially in Africa, humans approaching limits of survivability as sweltering heat waves engulf parts of Asia. Price of tomatoes soar 400% in India as heat waves and flooding hits crops. And remember, for food, we need to actually have cold chains, and those cold chains are powered by a source of energy. And if there's no energy access, then it means we have higher losses of food. Heat waves in Mexico as well. This report goes into a lot more detail where we look at high risk, and high risk is referenced as no access to electricity, income below poverty line, poor construction, no access to refrigeration for food, agricultural produce, and vaccines. So for example, in 77 countries, we analyzed 1.12 billion people are at high risk due to a lack of access to cooling. So this is now focusing the conversation of what does this energy justice actually mean? And if you compare a house where there's no refrigerator, even one refrigerator, the standard of living is very different from a house that has a refrigerator. And when we start looking at justice in that way, we can start looking at high risk areas and medium risk areas. So we have figures there showing that 2.9 billion lower middle income people are at medium risk of a lack of access to cooling. So this figure increased by 11 million compared to 2022 and by 181 million compared to 2020. So what it's showing is that the situation is getting worse. Focusing on Africa a little bit, the most acute cooling access gaps are in poor rural areas of sub-Saharan Africa and in the growing cities in higher temperature regions of the global south. So we're talking about 306 million rural poor people at high risk due to persisting rural electricity access gaps and extreme poverty. And that also translates to 815 million urban poor, so in the town centers, are at high risk due to urban poverty and growth in informal settlements, offsetting the effects of closing urban electricity access gaps. So the call to action, and to the journalists here as well, in the run-up to COP28, catalyze new commitments towards pro-poor cooling innovation, integrated electrification planning, and financing for data, technical support, and project implementation. So this is where the energy goes. We've also indicated 10 countries in Africa have over 50% of their total population at high risk due to a lack of access to cooling. And you'll see there we have Nigeria, noting that we've been we've been talking about Nigeria earlier as well. You can also see whether your country is actually on this list. It means over 50% of the total population are at high risk. If I move on to addressing both human and climate risks, these limitations, there's limited options that are both affordable and sustainable, risk favoring cooling devices that are inefficient and increase pressure on energy systems and emissions. What that generally says is sometimes in a lot of these countries, they already have low energy access, electricity is expensive, but then we're also importing secondhand equipment, secondhand refrigerators, which come from other countries. And these secondhand refrigerators are normally older and inefficient, which means you need more energy to actually run them. And that means you spend more money on energy. So it's a cycle that is actually created. And we call it a poverty cycle. So the call to action in this case is to mobilize strong policy commitments from national governments on codes, standards, and national cooling action plans to deliver sustainable cooling for all. Quite recently, this June, Kenya launched its National Cooling Action Plan and has invited the private sector and whole of society to actually look at it and see how we can implement urgently. So there's an urgent requirement to protect the vulnerable urban dwellers through passive and nature-based cooling solutions that can protect vulnerable urban dwellers are typically not distributed equitably. So you'll notice in areas where you have poor, vulnerable urban dwellers, you have less trees. You know, when you talk about informal settlements, etc. And trees actually cool the area by even up to 10 degrees centigrade. So the call to action here as well is to reduce heat risk for urban dwellers around the world by investing in nature-based solutions for cool cities and in passive and efficient design for cool buildings, leaving no one behind. And this now you start seeing the link between energy and the whole drive about having passive solutions like planting trees, having white roofs on buildings, and actually building in a sense that we are looking at adaptation towards a warmer world. So what do we need to do with our buildings so that we don't have everyone buying fans whenever we get the heat stresses or putting in air conditioners? There's also an issue around integrating gender responsive solutions. As I mentioned before, there's youth and gender work that we do, and a lack of sex disaggregated data poses serious difficulties to quantifying gender specific cooling needs, guiding gender informed policies and solutions, and mobilizing finance. So that is part of our work. And here I'll just read the call to action is to account for gender informed needs and solutions, including for thermal comfort, agriculture, food, and healthcare, starting with systematic collection and use of disaggregated data, so that we can learn how cooling is affecting women, young women, young men as well, differently. So this is all the resources available, and you can get those on our website. We have Chilling Prospects report. I've just gone through it. We have a challenge, Beat the Heat, Nature for Cool Cities Challenge, which is in conjunction with the Cool Coalition. This is Cool Sustainable Cooling Solutions tool. You type in there, and there's various solutions as well that's available. We have Base SE for All webinar, Gender Responsive Cooling, and we hosted one in a couple of months back, but you'll find it there as well. And this is, in essence, to create a lot of awareness. So just to come to an end, we have the opportunity to drive towards an ecosystem that really looks at that low-hanging fruit, and it's called mission efficiency. It looks at an energy efficiency opportunity, and it has an ecosystem of reducing the silo efforts and having everyone work together. It also does energizing energy efficiency with the marketplace, because a lot of projects we've had don't have funding, and a lot of funders say there's no bankable projects. So this tries to bring that together with added technical assistance to create bankable projects in the region. So the power of energy efficiency and an energy efficient life is what mission efficiency is about. And to close off, we've seen that energy efficiency, which is not visible, has power and is the greatest opportunity, especially in Africa, towards energy access issues. For example, the power to create jobs, to grow sustainable economies, and shield them from the energy crisis, and to accelerate the vision of SDG 7 and the Paris Agreement. So energy efficiency powers, if you're going to take anything away from this whole conversation, it powers access to modern and sustainable energy for all, off-grid electrification, energy security and fights inflation, progress on climate change and just, equitable energy transitions, sustainable development, modern lives and livelihoods. And there's an invitation there to join us at Mission Efficiency through the missionefficiency.org website. And our purpose here is that with energy efficiency, we want to build an energy efficient world. And there's resources available for journalists as well. You might see this on our Instagram or social media pages. And triple bottom line is, if we help the planet, especially through energy efficiency, we help our wallets, help your wallet. And an energy efficient life is accessible to all. So with that, I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. Hello, Vivian, over to you.
Hi, Elizabeth. Sorry, thank you so much for your presentation and for bringing all of that great perspective and, the call to action. I'm glad that we have journalists here who can take up this conversation further and write stories, do analysis, hold policymakers and governments accountable to make sure that, Africa we move Africa forward in the energy efficiency and energy transition conversation. And the fact that you also kind of gave us a lot of resources, and I'm advising journalists on this call to tap into these resources, go to Sustainable Energy for All, World Resources Institute. I also saw Victor give us the Energy Access Explorer. So we should really tap into these resources to try to tell these stories going into COP28 to get Africa talking about how we can get people out of energy poverty. Thank you so much. All right, so we're going to move to the next presentation, which is by Abdulkarim Mujid. Abdulkarim Mujid is a Premium Times journalist who has covered climate and environment issues extensively. His professional journalism work has focused on development, agriculture, food security, climate change, and the environment. And through his robust coverage of the United Nations Conference of Parties in Egypt in 2022, he's also here to talk to us about how we can effectively cover COP28. And his reports have sparked remarkable impacts across the 3 tiers of government in Nigeria. Thank you so much, Abdulkarim, for being here. We are ready for you.
Thanks so much for having me, Vivian. And good morning to everyone joining on the call. You just took the words out of my mouth, Vivian, after Elizabeth's presentation and Victor's. I was just about saying that these are the guys journalists should go to for proper context into whenever they are doing any of their stories. Please, can you share my presentation?
Okay, Design. Design, are you there? Let me try to do that myself. Sorry, give me a minute.
It should be sharing. Can you see it?
Okay, yes, we can now.
Okay, thanks so much. So basically, because I would just like to touch a bit on, as it is sort of build up to what the previous speakers have said, from the journalist angle. As journalists, we owe the people the responsibility of letting them know what they should know in order to make informed decisions. And as we all know, later this year, parties, delegates from parties will be gathering for COP28, the 28th edition of Conference of the Parties. And we are all looking forward to it. We are all looking forward to seeing further conversations on how to achieve the global target of reducing emission well below 1.5 degrees Celsius. And it's obvious that the energy sector is contributing largely to the global emission that is driving the climate change crisis, as we see. Please, next slide, please. So just to do this, I will be taking us through the content, what is energy poverty, Africa's energy status against the world, steps to reporting energy poverty in Africa at COP28, and then we can talk about what next. And next slide, please. Okay, so as journalists, some of us might not be experts, energy expert or whatever, but it's imperative that we try to get ourselves acquainted to any issue we are trying to report about. And in this case, oh, sorry, I was just reading the comment. I thought it's so in this case, we're talking about energy poverty, and energy poverty, according to the European Union, is a situation in which households are unable to access energy services and products. So those who don't have access to reliable and affordable energy sources are said to be poor. As journalists, we just need to be as simple as much as we can, so people will understand these issues better. People will know how these issues are related to them. People will be able to easily assimilate what it means to be energy poor as individuals living in Africa. Please, the next slide. So Africa against the world, I just want us to have a sort of background, a sort of perspective as to how, when we say Africa is energy poor, what does it mean? They say Africa remains the most energy poor continent in the world, despite holding more than 8% of the world's proven natural gas reserves. Next slide, please. Okay, so where energy is available in African countries, it is often expensive, inefficient, polluting, and also unreliable. I'm in Nigeria, so I don't know what's applicable to folks from other African countries, but I know it's almost the same. Currently, we are facing a sort of, a significant spike in the prices of fuel, and that is really telling already. So people who are not, low-income earners are really feeling the brunt more. And we see where the government are also trying to make moves to say, okay, they want to give palliative and all of that, but that is still under contention. But the essence of it, the long story, to cut the long story short, is the fact that these energy assets has been quite expensive. Domestic natural gas can help to alleviate Africa's energy poverty, but despite reducing over 6% of the world's natural gas, despite producing over 6% of the world's natural gas supply and having close to 1/10 of proven global, reserve, most of the African countries have no access to its natural gas. So it's this brief is not exhaustive. There are still more, but because I just want us to have something at the back of our mind as we are going into COP towards reporting this. So you can read more about this at the Hawiti report. Was released earlier this year in February. Next slide, please. So now, what are some of those key steps that journalists need to, bear in mind whenever they to report energy poverty in Africa at the forthcoming COP conference of the parties? First, it is important that journalists do their homework. They do a desk research and collect data. And a simple example is some of the resources I think journalists will need for this is what Elizabeth and Victor just presented. So oftentimes, some journalists make the mistake of just jumping onto a story and just report it at the periphery without really doing their homework. When you do your homework, you'll be able to communicate, you'll be able to tell the story better. And one of the key steps to take while embarking on doing any story is the desk research and data collection. So you conduct thorough research on energy poverty in Africa before you even travel to COP. identify the causes, as a few have been mentioned by Elizabeth and Victor, and the impact, the potential solutions, and also collect relevant data from reliable sources. She shared some sources where we can harvest some of this data and be able to communicate them in a way people in our various countries across the geographical focus of our respective newspaper will be able to assimilate easily and understand issues better. Next slide, please. So engage relevant stakeholders at COP. When you get to COP, of course, the COP environment can be quite, how will I put it, entertaining. You see all manners of people coming for all walks of life for the core purpose of driving the climate, agenda. And as a journalist, you don't get carried away by this. If you want to report on energy poverty in Africa, as a journalist coming from Africa, you engage relevant stakeholders. I use the picture there where while at COP, one of the things I did while pursuing other stories was the fact that I saw that, they had this pavilion, the youth pavilion, children and youth pavilion for the first time. And anytime you step into that pavilion, you see different activities going on, how the youths are participating towards, driving the climate change message, climate change justice, adaptation, mitigation, and the likes. And that caught my attention. I was like, wow. And a major thing that people at COP were talking about was the issue of loss and damage, especially people from African countries. And coming from Nigeria, where we actually experienced one of the worst floods in a decade last year, and hearing these people talking about loss and damage, hearing these people talking about what they are calling for, hearing these people talking about what brought them to COP, I was moved to say, okay, I want to engage the youth at COP further. So I had to interview, youths at COP from across different countries to see what are they saying, what is the message they are trying to drive. So you engage relevant stakeholders, government officials, NGOs who are doing stuff around the energy space. You engage them and be able to tell beautiful. Of course, we'll talk about some of those stories that you can also be that you can get on while engaging them. Sometimes as journalists doing analysis on some of these issues, we a dilemma that some of us face is the fact that we don't seem to get maybe a credible expert, an authoritative expert to breathe life to our stories, to be able to explain some of these things better in a way that will align with the analysis that you are doing. So it's important that while at COP, the person sitting right next to you will be the best person to breathe that life to your story. So you engage. By the time you just go as journalists and you're just looking, you are keeping quiet and you not really having that conversation, you are not sitting at the right place at the right time, then I think you are not helping yourself or also helping your newspaper or whatever medium you are reporting. Next slide, please. So number 3, I say identify and amplify success stories. I can see from Elizabeth's presentation, there are quite a lot of solutions she has proposed towards bridging the gap around energy, poverty on the continent. So I just feel as journalists, it is important that when you identify things like this, you amplify it, highlight those success stories and best practices in addressing energy poverty in Africa. Identify the challenges, the barriers that, okay, of course, while trying to tell solution stories, sometimes there could be limitations. You highlight those limitations, amplify the solutions, and also those progress, that is being made towards ensuring that there is energy access and energy sustainability, you'll be able to highlight some of these issues. And that can be done when you pay a cursory attention towards some of the success stories that people, climate change stakeholders, energy experts at COP are also driving. So before I say attend relevant sessions, there could be a lot of, session side events across pavilions at COP, and it could get overwhelming, by the time you attend 1, 2, 3, side events and the likes. But so as a journalist who intend to report on energy poverty in Africa, it's important that you attend relevant sessions, the side events, meetings related to energy poverty and sustainable energy access in Africa. Okay, next slide, please. So number 5, I said network with other stakeholders, share insights, contribute to discussions and on energy poverty alleviation. It's important, like I mentioned earlier, why at some of these side events, you get to meet with different experts across field, experts across different African countries. And depending on which of the country from Africa you, as a journalist, you come from. For me, I'm from Nigeria. I'm interested in telling the story of how the huge gap we have in energy poverty, especially with people in the hinterlands and the likes, even among the elites in the urban areas. So I'm interested in telling a story of sustainability. I'm interested in telling the story of how this how we can drive, how we can uplift people, how we can close the gap of energy poverty in Nigeria. Looking at data from 2016 to 2022, we see that a lot of people in my country, have plunged into extreme poverty more. And this is really telling. So in the case where people cannot afford energy, in the case where people don't have access to sustainable energy, so they are definitely bound to bounce back to cutting down of trees to use as firewood, which inadvertently is also adding to the greenhouse gas emission, depleting of natural resources in the forest and all of that. So poverty is a key factor here that is also that needs to be resolved. So be able to network, share some of the insight of what is peculiar, those things unique about your country that you feel, is also causing, some of these challenges that you are facing. Then also be able to tell a story of what your country can learn from other countries by engaging, networking with these people. You can tell a story of, okay, what Nigeria can learn from Kenya towards, reducing energy poverty in the country. Disseminate findings from some of your engagement, from some of these side meetings. There will be recommendations. There will be, some of their core findings. Be able to amplify them. Be able to do some critical analysis around them. Speak to experts. Don't claim to know all as a journalist. Be able to engage some of these people, and you'll be able to tell beautiful stories. And before we take on questions, I would like another thing that is important is that eat good food as a journalist, because that is where your energy to good reporting lies. We saw what happened at COP. There's a significant spike in the prices of maybe food and all of that, and quite a lot of people could not even afford a coffee, sustainably for the next 2 weeks. There was a video, I don't know how true that was, that the broadcaster, a journalist collapsed why, as a result of it. So for you to be able to report on energy poverty in Nigeria, very well at COP, please. As a journalist going to COP, it can be hectic, overwhelming, and stressful. So you have to eat good food. If you don't have that energy, then I don't think you'll be able to do the job very well. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I just decided to make this as brief as possible. So there will be room for engagement, questions, and ways to us telling, great stories at COP. And I'll be happy to share my few thoughts on them. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Abdul Karim. That was some humorous ending, and I'm happy that you're already charging our journalists on what to do when they get to COP. That's some kind of optimism that they are going to be able to go to COP this year and do a lot of reporting around Africa and our energy transition discussion at COP28. So thank you so much again. We're already seeing some questions in the chat. And I can see some hands raised as well. And I'm glad that I'm already seeing Victor and Elizabeth dropping some of the answers to the questions. But I'm going to start with the first question from Eric Otino. Victor has attempted to drop a response to this, but I'm still going to take him up on it. So Eric said, hi, Victor, any ideas on solutions to address clean cooking? Maybe ideas from other participants. So I think this kind of fits into the question I also wanted to ask Victor. Eric said ideas and solutions. And for me, there are certain energy transition pathways that our leaders are already exploring, the green hydrogen, the jet P, and all of that. So I wanted to also ask Victor, how feasible are these transition pathways, or these plans that we have as a continent? How feasible are they, the implementation and the rolling out of some of these plans, and how can we effectively use this to drive energy prosperity in Africa?
Thanks a lot, Vivian, for that question, and also Eric. Maybe starting with the clean cooking one, I've already provided a view of the fuels, of the technologies that we can use in the clean cooking side of things. I think the major issue which has been there as far as clean cooking is concerned, compared to the electricity side of energy access, is the focus has been more on the electricity, but less on the clean cooking. And of course, at the moment, there's a lot of momentum in clean cooking as well. But one of the key things to do is to do an integrated planning that involves both the clean cooking and also the electricity, as well as the other interlinkages, as we already mentioned. So I think another issue is about awareness. Maybe the consumers side of things are not aware that these other clean cooking technologies or fuels can be even as cheaper or more cheap than even using the biomass. And research has been done, has been able to prove that. I'm not sure if there is, because there's this part of question, do you know any new innovation in this space, or one that is being developed now? I would say there are a lot of innovations that are going on, especially on the sides of cook stoves. There are cook stoves that are coming on that are more efficient than the traditional ones. And yes, I think there's a lot of innovation that's going on in that space. But what is key is whether there is will from the consumers, whether there's will from the developers, and whether there's will from the government to support also the clean cooking side of things. And I think there is. On the side of how feasible are the new technologies like hydrogen, I would say as feasible as wind or as solar and solar storage was a few years ago. I think 5, 10 years ago, when somebody talked about we can use solar to power homes. We can use solar to power agriculture. It was not sinking in our heads as much, but now it is. So I think hydrogen in the same loop is as feasible as that. Maybe we just as the technology continues to be developed, the technology costs will also be able to go down, and I think it's one of the key technologies that will be able to drive the energy transition, more so in the side of industries that are very hard to abate. And of course, when we do that, I think we'll be able to everyone achieve the transformation faster. Over.
All right, thank you so much. I guess Eric must have gotten response to his question. So thank you so much, Victor. I have a question for Elizabeth in the chat, and it says, how has the Energy Compact steered progress towards universal energy access within the region as compared to before? Annie Wambani.
Hi, Vivian. Thank you for the question. What I've done is I've actually put a link there for Anne. Let me see. And it goes into a lot of detail about the energy compacts. We've got various new energy compacts that are signed. So at the moment, and in the whole roadmap towards 2030, the energy compact is to raise $600 billion investment in SDG 7. From governments and the private sector, because a lot of the times we need that funding to accelerate the actions and the impact on the ground. And then also enhance the 800 million more people to have energy access. So when governments make these commitments, it ensures that there's priority and focus towards addressing the issues that we've raised earlier around energy poverty. And we find sometimes, for example, another energy compact goal, like 719 gigawatts of new renewable energy capacity coming from private sector. The compact helped to bring the people together who are actually acting, financing, and also creating policies around it. We've seen that works very well, and also it helps the countries have a common narrative. So that it's not silo efforts. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Annie. I think those, the figures and the details are very important. And I think, Annie, you should really, thank you, Elizabeth. Annie, I think you should really visit the link which Elizabeth has dropped in the chat, so you can get more information about that and, take it up to stories from there. I have a question from Helen, and I see that Elizabeth has dropped a link as well for Helen, but I'd really like everybody to, get to be part of, understand what the answers to these questions are, so that they can also take something out of here with them. So it's my first time learning about the Cooling for All program. What are some of the practical examples of cooling that are available and affordable on a large scale here in a country like Kenya? By Helen Shikanda. Elizabeth?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And one of the elements around, sustainability and the approach as well for cooling is using passive solutions. So passive solutions themselves refer to natural ventilation, something as simple as opening your window to cool down in a hot climate. Helps you not to use energy in the space, but you're using existing solutions. But that compounds with other issues. Is the window big enough? We've seen designs of buildings in Africa where the window is quite small, so it's not effective. Is your neighbor right next door that the wind doesn't actually come into your home? So now you start thinking about the town planning, the spatial planning around the materials you use for the building. So it's quite common to see, especially in informal settlements, people using iron sheets, and we've started seeing schools being built from that. And yet we are in a warming climate. So it means those spaces get even hotter and the people can't thrive in them. We can't expect people to actually survive in such buildings. So there's all these considerations that come into play. Another great solution is planting trees and using water bodies. And that's something that's been done for years and years. It's not a new innovation. But unfortunately, because of we haven't been planning our cities well, we're using the cut trees for biofuels that Victor's spoken to at length. We're actually affecting the natural area that we can use these passive solutions. There's studies as well, if you'd like to have a look on that site, on painting your roof white, because it reflects the heat and you don't warm your building, or painting your buildings white. You'll find, like in the coastal areas of Mombasa in Kenya, a lot of the buildings traditionally were painted white. Then we come and change that and suffer the effects of the warming climate. Water bodies, we don't effectively use our water bodies, and you find a lot of rivers are very dirty, they're polluted, yet they could be helping in creating cooling effects. Without taking too much time, but those are some of the passive solutions. And we have many more. We have a database where you can actually type in where your country is, or what's your country, and some solutions, or what the issue is you'd like to address, and the solutions as well. And I've shared the link. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. I recently saw the part of painting the roofs white and how it's, improving cooling in households. And I also recently heard about, people making bricks from clay to like build houses in places like Senegal. And I think these are some of the innovations that Africa is bringing out recently to help, people in the continent. So thank you so much, Elizabeth. Kate Okore, your hand has been up. Please, can you unmute and ask your question? But please keep it short. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'll try to keep it short. So, let me just say this. So, for someone like me, who's my interest in the climate space has always been revolving around climate and health. I was reading a research article that highlighted that, when you want to communicate the health impact of climate change, that it's important to look at it from the angle of the consequence, the solution, and, include a call to action. But most importantly, they stressed on the importance of, air pollution, of highlighting the impact of air pollution. And if anyone has seen the Clean Air Fund research done in Lagos, you see that air pollution is not only affecting health, but it's also affecting the economy of Lagos. So in the case of energy poverty, what's the best direction to go about? Because the most important thing here is to influence action among the public and also to get better policies. What would be the best action to communicate this if someone wants to stick to, a particular direction?
Kate, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I don't know if you got my question.
So are you trying to ask our speakers how you can bring the aspect of energy poverty reporting into health and climate? Is that what you're saying?
No. I'm just asking, like, when it comes to energy poverty, what would be the best angle? Because now we've talked about the consequence, what happens, in the case of energy poverty, and then we've also talked about some of the solutions, like Elizabeth talked about painting houses, painting the roof white. So what's the most effective angle to tell the story about energy poverty?
Okay, so I think I would go back to our journalist, who is a speaker as well. Abdul Karim, what would you say about this, and how can journalists take some of these angles from Elizabeth and Victor's presentation forward to come up with story angles to write about?
Thanks so much for that question. I really I do understand that it's one of the dilemmas, facing journalists who intend to report on some of these issues. The best angle to approach them from, and the lists are not exhaustive as well. Concerning the energy poverty, take for instance, if you are in Nigeria and you want to report on issues around energy poverty and all of that. Of course, stories are about the people. How is this thing really affecting the people? And it will be shocking to you that you might likely visit a community and maybe someone that is about 12 years old has not even witnessed electricity supply before in their life. And you see that maybe, so they are just in darkness all through. So, and for instance, Elizabeth mentioned issue of food spoilage. So when you don't have affordable, access to electricity and the like, so apparently it means how will you be able to preserve some of your food? How would they be able to also be able to carry out some of their activities that has to do with maybe related to energy usage and all of that? So can you report from that angle of a community that, has been cut off, that have been in darkness, and look at, okay, what are those means they are used to generate power? Is that sustainable? Is it environmentally friendly? So in terms of also the solutions, what are people doing in that regard in order to complement the fact that they don't have access to electricity? Are there, so in terms of cooking also, what are some of the clean cooking means that people, of course, all of us, we cook in our houses. In fact, about 2-3 days ago, I was also, engaging an expert around the gas sector, and what he was telling me about some of the dirty things that these guys are doing was quite mind-blowing. So stories are are things that affect people directly. You look at it and be able to tell the story from the human angle lens to say, okay, these people have been in this case for over this decade. This and this and this has happened. You can also take a deep dive into, let's say, the budget. Look at that community. Has there been anywhere they have captured that, okay, they will provide them electricity, this in the past? Was that money disbursed for that purpose? Who is implementing the project? So you are also indirectly also holding these people to account that, okay, people who are supposed to provide this community with energy are not doing so. As a result of that, are the people now maybe cutting down trees because they are now they depend on firewood. They depend, like the picture displayed in my presentation, a woman. You now look at the hazards also that is attached to this unsustainable means of energy that the people are sourcing. You can tell a story from that angle also, because these people are energy poor. They don't have access to sustainable energy. They don't have access to affordable energy. Or, these are some of the challenges that they are facing. So you see that by the time you are digging further, it becomes clearer and clearer that, wow, people, because some of us, we are privileged to be, in fact, I have children of my uncle. Whenever there is just, there is power outage and there's solar in the house, it will come up. When there's just darkness for 2 minutes, the children will begin to cry. Talk more of people who have been living in a community or in a village for over 15 years, for decades, and they have not even seen electricity before in their entire life. How would that be to you? So you can just imagine it yourself. So these are stories that we need to tell. I don't know if I've been able to answer your question, and if there are other things you'd like me to speak about, I'll be glad to do that. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Abdul Karim, for highlighting those story angles. I don't know if Elizabeth or Victor wants to add, because I know Sustainable Energy for All deploys a lot of clean energy access to communities across Africa. And I was hoping maybe Elizabeth could talk to us about some of the solutions that journalists can take up stories to tell in their countries.
Sure, thank you for that. And thank you, Abdul Karim, for showing those angles that can be approached as. Before I answer that, I think this is a very good conversation to have, because we find even if there's a lot of technology, still people are not taking it up. And it could be the narrative that we have in Africa, and this is where we need this collaboration with journalists, because how do we get from the technical discussions to Africans taking solutions that are readily available, and also working towards those that they understand with what their government is doing. For example, like use of hydrogen. How do people actually take time to understand how that will impact their families? So that is something that we can work on as a community. Especially you talked about clean cooking, because we find with clean cooking, even if it's not this advanced innovative technologies, we have stoves that are more efficient. So you use less of the biofuels. Or some people are actually opting to use smaller cylinder gas with efficient burners. So you can cook more meals with less energy, with less fuels. But at the same time, you still find someone who still go outside, buy charcoal, use the inefficient stove, and they say that food tastes better that way, or they're used to cooking their food that way. So it's having to educate and create awareness at length consistently as well, rather than a stop-start, because we find that stories start, then stop and disappear. And I like the element around holding organizations, holding people accountable as well. And maybe through this kind of writing, we can all hold ourselves accountable and have a roadmap to the writing, going back and saying in 2022, this is where we were. We're now here. Have we improved or not? So with that, I just wanted to add those elements around the whole narrative conversation.
All
Yeah,
right.
also just to,
Okay. Victor, please.
okay, thanks. Yeah. So I also wanted to add a bit on some of the questions that are on the wall. Not sure whether you read them out later, but I wanted to respond to the one of what to do in the displacement settings, as far as what are the solutions which can be deployed. And I think Elizabeth has already completely addressed an angle using maybe the smaller sizes of cook stoves and fridges as well. But another issue would be to go off grid if it is on the electricity side of things. Go off grid, mini grids, and also the solar home systems, the standalone systems. I think that will also be able to help address that, because one of the challenges in these areas is because they are most of the times they are in remote areas, and the income of those people are always low, so they experience poverty. So accessing energy services becomes a bit difficult for them, and the extended infrastructure through the grid may not be able to make economic sense, because in the camps is also more temporary. So hopefully solutions and smaller designed to meet their needs would be better. Then there's also another question which relates to climate change and insecurity. I think this also fits well in the context of the discussion we are having, leaving no one behind, because we know there are places which are conflict-oriented, they are very fragile, experiencing a lot of violence, and yet people are still there, and energy is arrived. They still need to be able to get energy. So that aspect of security issues also contributes to the fact that some do not get access. So a lot of focus also need to be employed there. Preach peace, and also the relationship would also include just a small spike in energy price translates to even going deeper into poverty, because most of the people that are below the poverty line, or those who are spend half of their income on food and also on energy. So if the energy prices increase, then it means they are doomed. Their expenditure on food will increase, and they continue even going to such kind of levels. So effort in terms of ensuring peace and tranquility are also contributing factors towards not leaving anyone behind.
All right, thank you so much, Victor. I see that you you answered that of Norma Benson as well about climate change and insecurity. Of course, in Nigeria, there are hard to reach areas because of conflict and insecurity, and journalists find it difficult going to some of these places. And one thing that is also affecting those places in Nigeria is energy poverty, because they tend not to have access to energy as well, because even energy access is not able to reach them because of conflict in those areas. So I'm definitely sure that's a great story to tell if you want to tell that story. And also, Elizabeth mentioned during her presentation about gender inclusivity and healthcare. I wanted to talk to Kate about, she said she's into healthcare and climate change, and you can also look at how it affects maternal mortality, energy access and affecting healthcare in communities in your country. So these are areas you can look at. I've visited communities where people don't have access to energy, but they have all these portable small solar systems that they use to charge their phones. So these are people we need to tell their stories to know that energy poverty is affecting Africa, but these are the solutions that we have and that are, getting to communities that are underserved. So thank you very much. Fato's hands has been up, so I'll quickly take Fato as well. Please keep it short. We're out of time. Fato, are you there? Can everyone hear me? I don't know if it's from my end. Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So I think there's one more in the chat from Florence. Hello, I'm Florence from Malawi. I would like to hear from Abdul what he thinks African journalists missed in their reporting of COP27 that should be tackled at COP28. Did African journalists do their audiences justice, considering that COP27 was held on the continent? Abdul, I don't know if you want to answer that, please. We're out of time already.
Oh, that's fine. I'll be brief with it. Thanks so much for the question, Florence. Last year it was a shout here and there that we are having Africa Cup and all of that. Yeah, I know. Aside from energy poverty, Africa is also, most journalists generally in Africa, we are also poor because we don't have the financial muscles to independently say, or maybe our newsrooms, send journalists to maybe events like that as COP. I remember just where I stayed at COP was even up to about more than $300 per day. So how many newsrooms in Africa will be able to, send a journalist to such an event and will be able to sponsor you for over 15, 50, or let's say 15 days, 15 nights at COP. So for me, that also robs journalists from being able to engage delegates from their countries as much as they would want to know what they are bringing to the table and how they are also driving climate change policies in their respective countries. What are some of those things that they are also contributing to? Maybe the African group of negotiators, the bloc, and all of that. Also being able to engage them during their side events on some of those things, the promises. I remember for me as a journalist at COP last year in Nigeria, the Nigeria sport minister was at COP, and I was wondering, what's the sport minister coming to do? And the sport minister launched a campaign of, is it something 250K to plant trees, engage the youth, and give them stipends. And every time he posts on social media, I ask him, what is the update on that? So that way you'll be able to follow up on some of these people who make claims that they want to do this, they want to do that. What are the implementation strategies? Are they doing that? So I really think because of the inability of most African journalists to be able to participate in this event independently, without the influence of, imagine a government official sponsoring a journalist to call. Will you be able to interrogate? Will you be able to ask him the right question that he will not frown at, after all he that pays the piper dictates to? But I was privileged to attend COP, sponsored by an independent body. So it gives me that room to be able to engage people freely, engage irrespective of where you are coming from, irrespective of who you are. I ask you the right question, the direct question. So I feel if journalists in Africa are able to get, and I'm also using this medium to appreciate the climate tracker for, giving journalists in Africa these or some of these opportunities to be able to attend COP and independently report on some of these issues. So can we have more organizations being able to support journalists who are willing to report on these issues? And that way we'll be helping to also amplify the issue of climate change, that is affecting the continent. So I think one of the major things, to answer your question, is that journalists in Africa missed out at COP is the inability to be able to, for journalists to participate effectively and efficiently from different countries. Let's have good numbers of journalists coming to COP to report on issues as it affects their country and also as it affects the continent as a whole, most especially the issue of the loss and damage, the issue of the energy poverty we are talking about. So imagine if we are able to give it a robust coverage of how this thing is affecting people from different lenses across the 54 African countries. Just imagine the kind of impact that will have in the conversation that they have. So that is it for me. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Abdul Karim. I think that also fits into the next one I'm about to talk about. I wanted Kate to look into the chat to see that Elizabeth has dropped another very important story angle, which is about vaccines that were lost due to lack of adequate refrigeration resources. It's a growing issue, and I think we should really, we should look into it and tell those stories. These are important stories for Africa. All right, so thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to share a link now to our COP28 African Energy Justice Opportunity. So currently Climate Tracker is, we have an open application for journalists who want to go to COP. We need 4 fellows from Africa, 2 in-person, that's 2 persons to travel to Dubai with us, and then 2 online fellows as well. So we're looking for journalists to apply for this opportunity so that we can pick the best hands to travel with us to COP28. And of course, we have a competition in the application form, and we're looking for journalists to write energy justice stories from Africa. And this is why we're organizing these webinars, so that you will understand the story angles to tell and how to tell these powerful stories from your countries. So we're looking for stories that it can be continental, it can be national, it can be local. We want journalists to take on the challenge to tell the stories from a nuanced and complex perspective. Some of the stories that we're looking for, some examples of stories that we're looking out for are stories on how resilient communities are in adapting to climate poverty and also trying to pull themselves out of energy poverty. Maybe it could be a community where they are already using clean energy like wind, like solar, to be able to bridge the gap. We are also looking for stories on how reliant your national electricity grid is on fossil fuels, comparing fossil fuels and renewables in your country and how reliant your country is to fossil fuels. We're also looking at, stories on how families who work in fossil fuel extraction and how they feel about the future. Some of what Victor said during his presentation was talking about leaving no one behind, because there are families who actually work in these fossil fuel industries who would be looking at how their lives will be impacted going forward in the energy transition drive. So we're looking for success stories, success or failure stories of the transition efforts by your country. We're looking for the plight of communities without energy access. We're looking at how finance flows from the global north is affecting energy transition drive in your country and in Africa as a whole. So these are stories we're looking for. We're not looking for stories that, we're not interested in stories that are advocacy pieces or opinion pieces. We're not interested in something you published like a year ago or 2 years ago. We want stories that you published between June 30th and August 2nd, 2023. So we're not interested in pieces that address elements of climate change without discussing energy transition issues specifically. We're also not interested in pieces that are overly simplistic or critical without any basis. And you also have to use multiple sources and facts and data in your stories. So yeah, I'm going to advise every journalist on this call to try to key into this opportunity. I myself, I was a Climate Tracker fellow last year, and it was a very good experience for me. It was a learning experience. It was my first time covering the conference. I'd covered previously online, and it was good because I did a lot of stories. I was able to understand Africa and the negotiations. I spoke to some of our African negotiators, and I wrote stories from that. I wrote stories on loss and damage, gender, and climate change, and so much more. So I'm going to advise every journalist on this call to take up this opportunity. It's a great opportunity, and I'm looking forward to your applications. So something else I'm going to do is to also drop I'm going to drop this in the chat. This is from EJN, Environmental Journalism Network, Journalism Network rather. For you can access this for data. Sorry, I'm just going to drop that on the chat. You can access this. It's a journalism data compilation about Earth journalism data compilation. So you can access that. You can use that to tell your stories. There's also this other climate experts resource from Carbon Brief that you can always use to tap into experts from the global south when you're telling your stories and you're looking for experts to interview, energy experts, climate experts, environment experts. These links are going to be important to you. So I'm going to advise you all to also tap into these resources and also do apply for Climate Trackers COP28 opportunity. And I hope to see you in Dubai. So thank you so much. Again, thank you to our speakers, Elizabeth, Victor, and Abdul Karim. It was so great having you on this call and bringing in your perspectives to help us understand better Africa's situation going into COP28. So this is where we draw the curtains on today's webinar. And yeah, thank you again and bye.
Thank you, Vivian. Bye. See you soon, everyone.
Bye.
In one way.
Thank you. Bye.